the question about the 4 cups of wine, if it's better to do on red. So,
Yes.
The difference about the Pesach Seder is as follows: that for Shabbos, red wine and white wine have they're the same, they're equivalent. All we say about on Shabbos about red wine, making Kiddush on red wine by Shabbos, is that red wine in those days was better. So nowadays, if you have white wine that's better, you should make Kiddush on white wine. If they're equal, you can make Kiddush on either one, white wine or red wine, whatever they're equal. If they're equal, if you enjoy them the same, you can make Kiddush on either wine. When it comes to the Pesach Seder, it says that if they're equal, you should use red wine because of the idea of I believe the reason is, I checked up the reason. I'm just trying to make sure I didn't check it up today again, but I believe the reason was because of that, because Paro killed the male children, the blood of that we want to use red wine. So therefore it says if you have red and white wine, it's better to use, you should use red wine, and it adds that you should also search to try to find red wine. If you have white wine that's better, you should use the white wine that's better, but you should search to try to have red wine that's just as good as the white wine or better. Okay, now in today's class, we're going to learn some laws that a lot of the laws we're going to learn today are connected to laws of blessings, brachas that you make, and that due to different circumstances that we have on Shabbos, there's certain differences in there's certain scenarios that come up regards to making when we're going to say blessings. That's just a general picture of what a lot of the class is going to be about today. We're holding in chapter 77, Halacha Yud Beis. Siman Ayin Zayin, Halacha Yud Beis. Now, just the introduction to this halacha. There's what does a person has to make. There's certain things that it's considered you fulfill the mitzvah of making kiddush when you make kiddush with it. Let me just step back, take a step back. Let me just go back a step. According to, like we mentioned earlier, according to the Torah, you fulfill the mitzvah of kiddush through saying a bracha in davening. However, the rabbis instituted that a person should make kiddush on wine. Now, besides making kiddush on wine, if a person doesn't have wine, they're able to make on bread. However, it's to fulfill the institution of the rabbis of making kiddush on wine or something in place of wine, it's specific things. It can't just be that you make kiddush, let's say, on water. So now, if one would make kiddush on something that one is not allowed to make kiddush, it would be considered as it would be as if he didn't make kiddush at all. If that person didn't make kiddush at all, and they would have to make kiddush again. So that's just a little introduction to this halacha Yud Beis. Now let's learn the halacha inside. Kiddush alakais v'savar shu yayin v'achakach nimsa shu mayim aishar mashke. If one made kiddush over a cup and thought that there was wine inside that cup, inside the kiddush cup, and later realized that there wasn't wine in the kiddush cup, there was either water or a different liquid, the law is yachzer v'yikadosh al yayin, they have to say kiddush again on wine. However, it's not so simple. The im Amad lefan of yaim al shulchan v'haisa daite lishtais yain gam b'sei chasuda ein tzarich lekadish shenis to have a kilo kiddush al yain. If there was wine on the table that one was having their Shabbos meal, and they were planning on drinking from that wine during the Shabbos meal, then they wouldn't have to say they wouldn't have to say the bracha of kiddush again, and they wouldn't either need to say a bracha hagafen when they would drink that wine during the meal. Hagafen is the bracha that is recited when having a drink of wine, whether you're drinking wine anytime that you eat or drink. It's necessary to say a bracha before eating and drinking. So the bracha, there are different blessings for different types of foods and drinks. The blessing for wine is a bracha boire priagafen. So this bracha, since you said it when you were reciting kiddush, although you didn't, it turned out that you didn't have wine in your kiddush cup, still it would be unnecessary to say the bracha boire priagafen when you drink your wine during the Shabbos meal, since the wine was on the table when you said the blessing during kiddush. And just to remind everyone, in case it's not clear, last class we mentioned that in kiddush we say first the paragraph Vayechulu, which starts off Yom HaShishi. Then you say the blessing on wine, which is Be'er Priagafen, ends off Be'er Priagafen. And afterwards, you say the blessing on Kiddush, which ends off Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbos. V'im lehaya lefanav ala shulchan avahaya yain bebeisai v'yisedaite lishtes yain gai mesei chasuda einay tzarech levarach be'er priagafen ella asher kiddishanu v'chulu. If one didn't have wine on the table, however, they had wine in their house and they were planning on drinking that wine during their Shabbos meal, they don't have to say the bracha that you recite before drinking wine with Be'er Priagafen, but they would have to recite again the bracha that you say for a kiddush. So that's a different scenario. Met the makom shu chmar medina. If there was a cup, if in the kiddush cup there was beer or a honey drink, which is called med. I'm not sure if it's found around, if it's something that's found around in these days, or it was just in the days of the Shulchan Aruch. I'm not sure about that. Don't know about that. Never heard about this drink med. So if one of these drinks, either beer or this met, is a drink that is something special, it's a significant drink that one would it would be an honor to, you would, let's say, drink it by a meeting, or it would be something that would be honorable to give the drink, and it'll be it's a way that people would drink, that like they would come, and when they want to give let's say a guest would come and they want to spend time together, and it'll be something in an honorable way, they would give this drink. Then that would be considered a chamar medina. It's a little bit of a complicated idea. What's considered something that is a type of drink that in that place, in that place, it would be considered an honorable drink. The idea, in short, is that wine is something that is a special drink. That's why we use it to make for kiddush. So something has to be equivalent in that place for wine. The people, just like wine, it's something that people would. It's an honorable way to have a drink together with someone else. So it has to be something in that same level a drink that's in that same level, like beer in a lot of places, or coffee in a lot of places. So then it could be used for kiddush, but still it's not as preferable than using wine. And not everyone holds that you can make kiddush on this a chamar medina, a drink that is a special drink. Therefore, kiddush should be recited on wine. But in a scenario that one uses kiddush for other things, they don't have to say kiddush again. It's a little. That's what I would say in short. There are a little bit more, but that's the short idea of a special drink.
I have a question going back to just a little before the special drink part. Did you say that if you bring more wine to the table and it wasn't the wine that was there during Kiddush, you have to say Kiddush again so that somebody hears Kiddush twice?
Right, because the first time wasn't considered hearing Kiddush on. The rabbis instituted that you should say Kiddush over wine. Now, since you didn't have wine, you didn't fulfill the rabbis.
No, I mean, you said bringing wine to the table after Kiddush. So the Kiddush person has wine, but the table's wine was brought later.
No, okay, sorry. If the person was reciting Kiddush and they thought there was wine in the Kiddush cup, and it turned out there wasn't wine in the Kiddush cup, there was a different drink. So since there wasn't wine during the while the person was reciting Kiddush, it is necessary to do Kiddush again. It was the Kiddush that they made wasn't considered a Kiddush.
Okay, so there wouldn't be two Kiddushes if the first one was wine, but additional wine is brought for the guests later.
Right, yeah.
One Kiddush is good enough.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
So if they have a drink like of beer or med, in any situation, whether there's wine on the table, whether there's no wine on the table, and they don't even plan on bringing wine to the table, they still do not have to say Kiddush a second time. Rather, you should say a bracha shahakol, the bracha shahakol, which is recited on all drinks besides wine or grape juice, and they should drink that, the beer or the med. And in communities where the custom is to recite Kiddush after the washing of your hands for challah, before they break the challah. So some communities have a custom to the first thing that they do during the meal is wash their hands, and afterwards they do the Kiddush ceremony. So in those communities that they do the washing of the hands before Kiddush, and Kiddush comes before breaking the cutting of the challah, they also do not have to say Kiddush a second time. Rather, what should they do? Rather, they should say bracha hamaitzi, which is said before eating bread or challah. And it will be as if the Kiddush, they recited Kiddush on the bread, over the bread, which is permissible, which counts as Kiddush in a case when one can't use wine, or one doesn't have wine. So in this, a little summary, there's just a lot of different cases in this halacha. We mentioned the general rule that the one would have to recite Kiddush a second time if they don't have wine. If in their Kiddush cup, if one recited Kiddush in a Kiddush cup that didn't have wine. But then there are exceptions to this rule. Number one, the first exception is if there's Kiddush on the table that you plan on drinking. Then you wouldn't have to recite Kiddush a second time. Now it's important to remember, if there's Kiddush on the table, if there's wine on the table, you don't plan on drinking during the meal, you would have to recite Kiddush a second time. Another exception, another point we mentioned is if you have wine in your house that you plan on drinking during the Shabbos meal, but it's not on the table, then you wouldn't have to say a bracha on the wine, but you would have to say repeat a bracha on Kiddush. The next point we mentioned was when you have a special drink that was in the Kiddush cup. So then you wouldn't have to recite Kiddush again. You would just say a bracha on this special drink. The bracha that's said on this special drink, which would be shahakal. And the last point we mentioned was if your custom is to wash before reciting Kiddush, then you should just make a bracha on the challah, and it would be considered as you did Kiddush over challah. The next halacha we're going to speak about some laws of Kiddush on Shabbos day. So also during the day, we have a Shabbos meal during the day, not just, there's a meal Friday night, and then there's also a meal Shabbos day. So during the Shabbos day meal, it's necessary to make Kiddush a second time. Although one already made Kiddush Friday night, you should make Kiddush Shabbos day. However, the Kiddush is different. During the day, you just say the bracha on the wine, and that's the Kiddush. There's no blessing to sanctify Shabbos during Shabbos day, before the Shabbos day meal. Unless one forgot to make Kiddush during the Friday night meal, they ate a Friday night meal without Kiddush, or they just didn't have a Friday night meal, then it's necessary to do the bracha of Kiddush during any time whenever you remember on Shabbos. So if you remember in the middle of your Friday night meal, you should say Kiddush then. If you remember Shabbos day, you should say whenever you remember you should say the bracha Kiddush before you start your Shabbos day meal. And whenever you recite Kiddush, we're going to learn soon, you have to eat after Kiddush. You can't just drink a cup of wine to fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush. There has to be eating that follows it. And we'll see the reason for that soon. However, even though we're saying over here that Kiddush is, Shabbos day Kiddush is just saying the bracha Beirei Priya Gafen, saying the bracha on wine. There are a lot of communities that added different things, different verses or things from Kabbalah that they recite before saying the bracha on wine. So when you hear someone say Kiddush Shabbos day, a lot of times you're going to hear different things before the bracha of Agafen. So that's, a lot of people have a custom to add different verses or things from Zohar or other sources, things from the Zohar to say before the Shabbos Kiddush. Yeah. I don't hear it. I'm not hearing. Okay. Yeah.
No, I just said that it said the host would like you to unmute. So I assumed it was for all of us, and I unmuted too.
Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. Give me a second. I'm just gonna mute everyone. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Megam nashim chayaves bekiddush. Women are also obligated in the mitzvah of kiddush during Shabbos day. Megam kaidim kiddush zeh also litzim klu afilu mayim. And also before kiddush, we mentioned before Friday night kiddush you're not allowed to eat. So also by Friday day kiddush, it's also forbidden to eat. And it's forbidden to eat anything, vafilu mayim, and even to drink water. Now this is only after one davens on Shabbos. Before one davens on Shabbos, you're allowed to eat and drink. Many communities allow it, and some even have the custom to eat and drink before to have energy and be healthy before they come to davening, not to be first of all, it's for health, that if it's not healthy for someone to go so many hours without eating, and secondly, in order to, if someone's davening, they want to have more strength to daven. It's forbidden to eat before, just like by the night kiddush. So once you finish davening, you're not allowed to eat until you make kiddush just on Shabbos day, just like by Friday night. And the best way to do the mitzvah of kiddush on Shabbos day is also to be recited over wine. And if one enjoys wine, if one enjoys a different alcoholic beverage, and recites kiddush on that alcoholic beverage, they fulfill the mitzvah of kiddush. But even in that case, if one enjoys an alcoholic beverage, it would still be better to make kiddush on wine. Also, you should be careful to have a kiddush cup that contains a revius, which I said is around 3 to 3.5 ounces, depending on different rabbinic authorities hold a little differently. What's the exact size of a revius? I've heard of the opinion 2.9 ounces, 3.1 ounces, 3.4. So during the Shabbos day kiddush, you should be careful to have a cup that contains the size of a revius. And you should drink a mouthful without interruption. Drink a mouthful of wine, or if you're making kiddush on something else, drink also a mouthful of that beverage without an interruption. Ve'im mekalish al yayin v'reitza lishtei skam yayin saraf ay kafe ayin la'el simin memtes sif vav. If one's making kiddush on wine and they like to drink coffee or a different alcoholic beverage, that'll be this. That's discussed in a different section of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Now we'll go on to Halacha Yudalid, which we're going to speak about having a meal following Kiddush. Bein b'layla, bein b'yayim, in Kiddush ela b'makom suda. Both by the night Kiddush, by Friday night Kiddush, and by Shabbos day Kiddush, it's only considered doing Kiddush when it's in a place that there is a meal following the Kiddush. Shenemar v'karasel Shabbos einig. As it says, you'll call to Shabbos, literally means you'll call to Shabbos pleasure. And our rabbis expounded on this verse from Yeshaya. In a place that you call Shabbos, meaning that you're calling, what's it mean a call for Shabbos? You're calling out to sanctify Shabbos. In that place there should be pleasure. And of course we know what's good pleasure? Sitting down to eat. One of the beautiful things that we have on Shabbos that we got to sit around with, whether it's with family or friends, or even when it's not, even when it's by itself, it's just a beautiful thing. We got to sit down and enjoy the tasty Shabbos food. So that's pleasure. That's the idea. The rabbis learn out. That's the pleasure that's meant when the verse says you should recite the sanctification of Shabbos with pleasure. That there should be a meal of Shabbos following Kiddush. If one recites Kiddush in one home, and this is true even in not only in one home, but even in one room, and you can't see a different room from this one room. And then they're going to eat in a different house or in a different room, which can't be seen from the place where Kiddush was recited. Even if they had in mind when they recited Kiddush that they're going to eat in a different place, you don't fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush. Part of the idea of Kiddush has to be with the meal is that the meal has to be in the same place where you recite Kiddush. So far we learned in this halacha that there has to be Kiddush with the meal, and now we're saying Kiddush has to be in the same place as and the meal has to be in the same place as Kiddush. Now we're going to see how much longer, when does the meal have to be? We said that you have to have a meal in the same place. Now we're going to say when the meal has to be. Also, it's necessary to eat right after Kiddush. If one doesn't eat the meal right after Kiddush, they don't fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush. So what's considered right after? Right after means that there wasn't you didn't take away your mind from the meal. From once you finished reciting Kiddush until you started your meal, you always had in mind to have a meal, and you never forgot that, oh, we're having a Shabbos meal. We're going to have a Shabbos meal. So if you're sitting down, someone recites Kiddush, and then people wait for other people to make Kiddush, and they're just talking around the table until they go wash their hands for challah, to eat challah. It's not considered a interruption that there was an interruption between the Kiddush to the Shabbos meal. However, it still is always good to do as much as you could, depending on the situation, of course, to bring as close as possible the Shabbos meal to the actual Kiddush. So even if you're not waiting for anyone, it would be better even not to have a conversation in between Kiddush and the Shabbos meal. Whatever, it's just a better thing. It's permissible to have a conversation in between, as long as you didn't forget and decide forget that there's going to that you're having a Shabbos meal right after following your Kiddush. ובאיים, אף שאין רצה לאכול מיד סעודה קבוע, יכול לקדש ולאכול קצת פס kisan. During the day, a lot of times, I wouldn't say a lot of times, I'm not sure if it's a lot of times, but it's possible that one doesn't want to have a whole Shabbos meal right after they finish davening. But they want to already make Kiddush. They want to eat something, but they don't want to eat a whole meal. So how do you fulfill the mitzvah of having a meal after the Kiddush? So you're also, to be considered a meal, it doesn't have to be washing and eating. It doesn't have to be eating challah. As long as it's going to be something that's made from the 5 grains, and you eat, I believe the size is, I have to check, but I think the size is the size of an egg, which is around 2 ounces. To eat that size of, no, it could be a kazai. No, actually, I think it's a 1 ounce, a size of an olive. Give me a second. Let me see if I find it over here. Yeah, I think it's an olive, the size of an olive, which would be an ounce. So if you eat an ounce of something made out of the 5 grains, which is wheat, barley, spelt rye, or oats, then it would be considered having a meal following your Kiddush. So for example, if you're having, you'll have some lakshan, some noodle kugel, the size of or something that is made out of the 5 grains, those 5 grains, even if you're able to do Kiddush, that'll be considered, you'll fulfill the mitzvah of Kiddush by eating something like that after Kiddush. If you don't want to wash yet, you want to save eating challah for later on in the day. And then it would be necessary to drink revius, which it says around 3 or 3.5 ounces of wine, in order that you could say an after blessing on the wine. Then you'll be able to say you would say an after blessing on. You would say a blessing that would include the wine in the after blessing. V'zois yochel lasis gam kodim musaf im libei chalash. So on Shabbos there's extra davening. There's the musaf prayer. So this kiddush, if you're not washing, but you're just eating a small amount, this you're able to. If you're just eating a small amount, then you're able to make kiddush even before musaf, before davening musaf, if you feel weak. Umayel shu tzarech levarech al kaisami lavadayin like kiddush yishtem in a kais kamali lugma v'oid revius. A person that does the circumcision and needs to make a blessing over the cup of wine that you say during the circumcision ceremony, and still didn't make kiddush that day when the bris is on Shabbos. So what he should do is he should drink from the cup a mouthful and also a revius. A mouthful is considered. What's the reason that he should drink a mouthful and a revius? He should drink a mouthful in order that should be considered that he drank wine during Kiddush. And then the additional revius is in order to be the meal following the Kiddush. There's an opinion that holds that you could make that your meal, you could have a meal on wine. The wine is something that's, like it says in the Torah, wine satisfies the heart. So the idea of a meal is that you should feel satisfied. So since it says in the Torah that wine satisfies the heart, even though it's not food, you could, in a time that it's called forth, you could, your meal that is following Kiddush could be with a revius of wine. A revius is a substantial measurement that makes it be considered a meal. Halacha Tesvav, which will be discussing more laws of eating before Musaf. Mutar litem achar tfilas shachris koidem tfilas Musaf. It is permissible to eat a little bit after davening shachris, the morning prayer, before davening the Musaf prayer, which the Musaf prayer is a prayer that's special. It's not a prayer that we say every day, just on certain days, for instance, Shabbos or on festivals, Rosh Chodesh. And it's because that they would bring a special sacrifice during the times of the Beis HaMikdash on those days. So we have, corresponding to the sacrifices that were brought on that day, we have a special davening. So you're able to have a small amount of food before the Musaf prayer. Utima, what does it mean, a small amount of food? Hainu pas kebetza v'lo yeser. It's the amount of bread that's the size of an egg, which I said is around 2 ounces, and you shouldn't be more. That's for it to be considered just a taste, it has to be the size of an egg or less. But if you're eating fruit, there's no limitation of how much you're allowed to eat. You're allowed to eat as much fruit as you want, even though you didn't yet daven the Musaf prayer. Provided that you're going to drink a mouthful of wine and an additional revius of wine, in order that it'll be considered that you have a meal with the wine that you're drinking. You're not just drinking the amount of wine in order for it to be considered a kiddush for wine, which that's a mouthful. Rather, you're also drinking an additional revius to be the for that in order for that amount to be your meal. That you're having a meal following the kiddush. So to explain that idea a little, just to explain that idea a little more, there's two things that are necessary. There has to be the wine that you drink for kiddush, and that has a measurement. How much wine do you have to drink for kiddush? That is a mouthful. After you now, the second thing is, after kiddush, in order for kiddush to be considered done properly, it has to be followed by a meal. A meal, there's a certain measurement of how much is one needs to eat for it to be considered a meal. So that is a olive size if you're eating. Now, for wine is something that sustains the heart, so it could also be a meal. So besides drinking a mouthful for kiddush, you could also drink more wine to be your Shabbos meal. In order that there'll be a Shabbos meal, sorry, not a Shabbos meal, in order for it to be that you have a meal following kiddush. So that because kiddush is only going to work if there is a meal following it. And I'll reiterate again, a quote-unquote meal. Just, of course, the on Shabbos, we're going to talk about soon, they should eat bread. So this is just the quote-unquote meal in order for the kiddush to be done properly. Yeah. Sorry. The le'es hatzarech samchinon the zois havi kiddush b'makom suda oyesh shavis yayin v'yoichol ksayis b'chamesh is mini dagan. And at a time of need, you can rely that wine will be considered a meal following kiddush. Or another option that you have to do is that you could drink a revius of wine and eat a kazayas, olive size from the 5 grains. Halacha tezayin. Now we're going to discuss how many meals does one need to eat on Shabbos. So far we discussed that there's a night kiddush, there's a day kiddush, and it's a technical thing that you need to also eat a meal. And we discussed that there's a meal Friday night in order that there should be, because kiddush has to be followed by a meal, and there also has to be Shabbos day, a meal followed by kiddush, because kiddush has to be followed by a meal. But now, how many meals does one need to eat on Shabbos? So let's see. Kol adam Yisrael bein ish uvein isha chayav nachol b'Shabbos shalei sudas. Every Jewish person, whether a man or a woman, are obligated to eat on Shabbos 3 meals.
Good for you.
Achas b'layla u'shtayim b'yom. When are the meals? There's 1 meal at night, and there's 2 during the day. V'chayev la'echol b'chol suda pas. And one is obligated to eat by each meal bread. V'afilu b'suda shlishis, even by the 3rd Shabbos meal, which that is in the afternoon of Shabbos, during the afternoon of Shabbos. It's during the afternoon of Shabbos, closer. We're going to learn soon the exact time for this meal. So even by the 3rd meal, yizar ma'ay lachol pas dafka. One should be careful to eat specifically bread. Bekivan shu neitel yadam levarach al natila. Sarach pas kibetza. And since the one is washing one's hands and making a bracha, making a blessing on washing one's hands, it is necessary to eat egg size of bread. That's the law that whenever when you wash for bread, you should make sure to eat egg size of bread. L'chein yizar kol adam shelo yilamale kresa b'suda shachris. Therefore, it's necessary. Therefore, one should be careful not to fill one's stomach during the morning meal. Even sometimes in one Shabbos meal, one has to pace themselves. There's so much we eat on Shabbos in one meal. Going from sometimes it's not just one course, a couple courses, 2-3 courses. One has to pace himself. So too is it now in this idea, if one feels that they're not going to be able to eat later on in the day, they should pace themselves and not to eat too much so they could eat a third meal later on in the day. In order that they're able to fulfill the mitzvah of having 3 meals. And if it's impossible to eat bread or challah during this third meal, they should eat at least food that's made out of the same ingredients as bread, although it's not bread. They're made from the 5 different grains. And because that's also the things that come from the 5 grains are something that sustain us. V'im gam zois yaf shaloi yeichol al kaparnim dvarim shederach leves bem esapas kagain basar v'dagim v'ketz bem. And if also eating from the 5 grains that isn't bread, even things that aren't bread, but they're from the 5 grains, one is unable to eat, then they should at least eat food that you eat along with bread. What's food that you eat along with bread? For example, meat or fish, something that you would eat together with bread. Some people say vegetables, things that you would put on. It doesn't mean it's the only thing that you eat with bread, but it's something that you put together with bread. And if one can't even eat this, what should they do? They should at least eat fruit that's cooked. I want to mention that according to the Alter Rebbe, he writes that you could even eat fruit that isn't cooked, even raw fruit. You could do you could if it's hard for one to eat other food, they could do the mitzvah of eating a third meal with eating even raw fruit, just taking an apple that wasn't cooked or any fruit in that manner.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Am I correct in understanding that he's saying we should eat from the something from the 5 species in addition to bread, which would be mazonot, right? It would be mazonas, wouldn't it?
It would be addition. You should eat.
I mean, from what you just said, I maybe I misunderstood.
You say that again?
I'm asking you if he said that we're supposed to davka eat something from the 5 species in addition to eating bread.
No. If one is unable to eat bread, then they should eat something from that's Mizona.
Oh, that I can understand. The other thing I wanted to ask you is something that we could eat with bread. Would that include something like hummus or tahina?
If you, that's something you with bread, yeah. If one is going to
Okay.
eat that plain, they could technically, eat the third meal with just eating hummus.
Thank you.
Okay. Zman suda shlishis hu mishagias ma mincha gdela dainu mishay shais umachsav ve'elach. When is the time to eat the third meal? It is once it reaches the time of what's called mincha gdela, which that is when it's 6.5 hours into the day. The day is divided into 12 hours. So a half hour after midday, half hour seasonal hours, then it's the time for the third meal. Now, although that the time of the third meal begins 6.5 hours into the day, a half hour after midday, it's still a lot of people hold that it's better to have the third meal closer to the end of the day.
Yeah.
So that will be the better time to have the third meal. Although the whole time from 6.5 hours on until the end of the day is the time that you could have your third meal. Also, it doesn't mean that the time for the second meal has to be before the 6.5 hours. If one only starts their second meal later, that's permissible. There's no time that from when the second meal has to begin, that the second meal has to begin before a certain time during the day. If one starts their second meal later on in the afternoon, they're able to do that. Okay, last week I think someone asked me about if the eating of challah, when we spoke about covering the challah, is the challah connected to the lechem apanim, the showcase breads in the temple?
Yeah.
So I actually read that I saw somewhere that there are those that say that the bread for lechem mishnah is connected to that, and for that reason, by the lechem apanim, by the showcase breads, there were 12 breads, 12 loaves. However, I haven't seen around these days, but I've seen people, right? Maybe it was way back. Could be there are places just I never seen nowadays that do this, that they would have 12 loaves of bread on the table, on the Shabbos table, for the idea of the showcase breads. But besides that idea, most people, from what I see, there's only two people only make they just have the two lechem mishnah. They have two challahs for lechem mishnah. And so what is the idea? There's only two challahs. Why are there only two challahs if there's a connection? If we want by the showcase bread there were 12. Is there any way that we have a resemblance to the showcase bread with only having two challahs? So if you realize there's the Hebrew letter vav. What's the shape of a letter vav? It has it's very similar to just a line, a long line, not a very long line, but just a line. And a challah could have a similar shape to that. So the two challahs are like two vavs. Vav is the 6th letter in the aleph base. So its numerical value is 6. So if you have two vavs by the challah, that's 6 plus 6, that's 12. So it's like you have 12 loaves of challah on your Shabbos table.
So, question?
Yeah,
So the 2 challahs is not because on Friday you get a double portion of man?
it is also because of that. That's the primary reason. Just like someone asked last week, was it also connected to the showcase bread? And I saw somewhere that it had a connection.
Oh, okay.
Okay. One is obligated to cut challah by every Shabbos meal on 2 loaves of bread, 2 loaves of the complete bread. The bread should be, the challah should be complete. Shouldn't
be broken.
It shouldn't be broken. There shouldn't be that you have red half a challah was the challah was already cut up. Rather, it should be a complete challah when you do the blessing over challah during the Shabbos meal. And this is by every Shabbos meal, even the 3rd Shabbos meal. You should break the challah. You should cut the challah over 2 challahs. You should hold both them in your hand. You should hold both of them in your hand during the blessing of Hametzi. And you should cut one of them. And the other one you don't have to cut. You're just holding it when you're saying the blessing. It should be there, and it should be held when you say the bracha Hametzi on the challah. And the custom is to make a mark with the knife, with the challah, with the knife on the challah in the area which you want to cut the challah from. Vatam, what's the reason why you should make this mark? Mipnei shebechol tzrichen lachtech tzah sabav apas kaidim birkas hametzi k'moshe kasati simin mem aleph sif gimel. That during the week, it's necessary to cut a little bit of around the challah before you say the bracha hametzi, and the reason is explained in a different section of Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. Which, in short, the reason is that you shouldn't have interruption between the reciting of the bracha to eating the challah, eating the food. Tell me what happened. Oh boy. Someone just axed it. It was like 4 o'clock. I was gonna finish with that. I guess I finished either way. And then, no, it's not blocking this thing.
You can't come in more copies on the computer. Probably use tools like that.
Okay, that's it. Oh, you need this thing. No, I don't see a Zoom link anymore. Use this.
So that's resume. The resources. Can you see on the bottom? Can you send it here? Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, it's getting a little late. Maybe we'll continue this halacha next week. And we'll finish good chance we'll finish this chapter next week. And want to wish everyone a good Shabbos. If anyone has any questions before we call off, please feel free to ask.
Yes, I wanted to ask, you said it's good to have you should have the two challahs on the table before the kiddush. And
Yeah.
now you said that the challah could be cut before the kiddush or during the bracha.
So, okay, sorry for I'll clarify. The challah should be covered by kiddush. Now,
Okay.
this halacha we're speaking about, after kiddush, when you're going to, there's a mitzvah to cut the challah. And so then you're going to uncover the challah. So then during kiddush, the challah is covered. After kiddush, you're going to wash your hands and cut the challah. So that's what we're speaking about now. After kiddush and you washed your hands, there's an obligation to cut challah on Shabbos, and it should be that you should have two challahs. That's a during kiddush. It's not. It's speaking about after kiddush. During kiddush, the challahs have to be covered.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
in many homes that I've been in, the custom is to break the bread, not use a chiruf, not use a
Knife.
a knife, a weapon of war on the table.
Yes, some have that custom. Sephardim have that custom.